They chose their words like mourners choose flowers, carefully, quietly, with meaning tucked between each syllable. The statement from Kensington Palace arrived before dawn had finished settling over London, a measured line from William and Catherine that neither courted the spotlight nor shrank from its weight. It did exactly what palace language is engineered to do: acknowledge grief, honor service, and open a narrow door through which the country could walk behind them. No embellishment, no embroidery, just the sense that something intimate had been made public out of duty. And then all attention swung to Westminster Cathedral, where the day's ritual would attempt the impossible task of turning love into order. By afternoon, the great red brick basilica breathed a hush that felt older than the city around it. Westminster Cathedral is London's Catholic heart, high arches dimming toward the heavens, mosaics that refuse to hurry, and today it would hold a page of royal history that is rarely written. A Catholic requiem for a royal in the modern era, a farewell shaped not by the Church of England's cadences but by the Latin of lament and mercy. The King and Queen would be there, the Prince and Princess of Wales too, not as distant silhouettes but as family, people who knew the sound of her laugh at Wimbledon, who could still see, if they closed their eyes, the way she squeezed a hand when words didn't yet come. The eve of the funeral had already set the tone. From her Kensington Palace residence, the coffin had moved under a September sky to rest overnight in the chapel of the Blessed Virgin Mary, a short, solemn journey bridged by prayer and watched by faces that couldn't quite decide whether to look or to lower their gaze. Soldiers from the Royal Dragoon Guards carried the weight with that peculiar military gentleness, armor outside, tenderness inside, while the Dean received the cortege at the threshold with a nod that felt like permission to let go. If you have ever trailed a hearse by one pace too many, you know that feeling, the moment a corridor becomes a river and you must step in. The coffin itself told a story in materials. Wicker, woven from English willow, a choice that rejected grandeur for grace, lightness for the sake of the arms that would lift it, and a whisper of woodland even in a city of stone. Over it lay the royal standard edged in white ermine, an ermine border that speaks a specific language about rank, a reminder that the woman they were burying had lived where ceremony and privacy wrestle each other into balance. On top, a wreath selected by her own family, not a florist's abstract but a memory-laden bouquet, white roses for Yorkshire, where she began, sprigs of yew from Hovingham Hall, where childhood runs through the hedgerows and eternity is green. You could map her life by footsteps at grounds she dignified simply by standing on them. At Wimbledon she became the face of grace, more than a figurehead, a presence, presenting trophies, consoling champions, understanding that a hand on the shoulder can do what speeches never will. It was her hand that steadied Jana Novotná in 1993 when the centre court sobs came. It was her voice that made loss sound survivable. 2 years later she would withdraw from frontline duties, relinquishing an Her Royal Highness not in scandal but in the kind of quiet that is its own statement. Mrs. Kent at a state school in Hull, teaching music as if the measure of a life might be counted in crescendos the tabloids never catch. Fame hears its own echo, she chose another frequency. The love story began in uniform and Yorkshire mud, a young officer of the Royal Scots Greys, a meeting at Catterick Garrison, a courtship without fireworks because the sparks were steady. 5 years later they married at York Minster, a departure from habit that felt entirely right to a woman who called herself, with an affectionate shrug, a Yorkshire lass. 3 children followed: George, Helen, Nicholas, and so did the diplomat's calendar, ribbons cut, hands shaken. The monarchy represented in places where it needed to be felt more than seen. But the 1970s cut deep. Rubella forced a termination in 1975, a decision wrapped in medicine and heartbreak. In 1977, a stillborn son, Patrick. There are losses that become rooms you never stop entering. She carried those rooms with a straight back and a soft voice. The faces in the cathedral told you how far her influence reached by the way they tried not to be seen. When grief is sincere, it becomes shy. The Duke of Kent stood with a steadiness that looked like love rephrased as posture, Lady Helen Taylor close by, a daughter's composure speaking a language more precise than any eulogy. The Royal Dragoon Guards were there again, as if to stitch the vigil to the Mass with a single seam of bagpipe breath. And somewhere in the labyrinth of seating plans, behind, never in the way, you felt the institution itself making space for a funeral that spoke in a different register. British monarchy and Catholic rite are not strangers, but they are seldom companions. Today they would share the same nave and ask no one to choose. The music selected the memories. Sleep, dearie, sleep does not need to be explained to anyone who listened as it closed another chapter at Windsor not so long ago. Played again now, the lament threaded two farewells together without forcing them to match, allowing this service to borrow a single tear from that one and to return it with interest. Bagpipes have a way of climbing your chest and refusing to leave. By the time the piper passed down the central aisle, the tune had become a bridge between sovereigns, between families, between the wild grass outside St. George's Chapel and the marble underfoot at Victoria Street. There is a politics to funerals that few admit and fewer navigate well. Today's message could have been muddled by optics, by old headlines and new timelines, by those who read every angle of the head as a paragraph. It was not. The presence of the King and Queen, the Prince and Princess of Wales, made one statement, that the Crown knows how to be kin. The Kensington note earlier was part of the same grammar, framing remembrance in the plural and placing William and Catherine not above the bereaved but among them. If you sensed composure more deliberate than usual, you were not wrong. Modern monarchy is always writing to two audiences at once, the country and the conscience. Today, both received the same letter. A Catholic requiem carries its own weather. The Kyrie opens like a door. The Dies Irae, when chosen, can crack the ceiling with its thunder of justice and fear. The Agnus Dei evaporates into mercy so soft you wonder if you imagined it. This service did not need to convince anyone of its theology to do its work. It needed to move a life from one shore to another without dropping a single memory into the water. The prayers rose, the incense turned sunlight into soft gold, the cathedral held. Even those who had never stepped into one before understood instinctively when to stand, when to bow, when to let the sound do the speaking. There were, of course, the threads that tie this moment to others. A monarch at a Catholic funeral is not unprecedented, merely rare. The late Queen knew how to sit in another church's pew with the same dignity she wore in her own. Long before today, her son attended a pontiff's farewell as a prince, representing the nation at a threshold where robes and flags share the same air. That is the secret of the best statecraft, to appear where presence matters without making presence the point. The Duchess's service asked for nothing so grand and received it anyway. Outside, London went on counting buses and deadlines because cities must. Inside, the ritual refused to be rushed. There is something about a wicker coffin, its human scale, the way it refuses to glare, that teaches a room how to breathe. The ermine border on the standard, the white roses from the North Country, the yew cut from a place she knew as a girl, these were sentences in a story that the family wrote with their own hands. Even the pall of sadness carried a contour that felt chosen rather than imposed. It is easy to confuse simplicity with lack. Today proved the opposite. If you came to measure the monarchy by tiaras and trumpets, this was not your day. If you came to measure it by its ability to honor a life as the life asked to be honored, this was a masterclass. It is a delicate thing, letting a person's private faith shape a very public goodbye. It requires the institution to be confident enough to step back and to be fully present while doing so. The balance held. The cameras behaved. Even the whispers learned to whisper softer. As the Mass drew to its quiet Amen and the final commendation folded into the hush, the procession turned once more into movement, shoulders squaring under the willow, boots finding a tempo that honored the pulse it now carried, faces setting like wet clay into expressions they will wear in photographs forever. Outside, the sound returned, traffic, pigeons, the ordinary mercy of a city that refuses to be a mausoleum. The wreath went with her. The family went with her. The country, for a few minutes, felt smaller and kinder. Later, people will remember the way the Princess of Wales inclined her head, the King's set jaw melting by degrees, the Queen's hand placing the day back into order. They will speak about the piper's air that stitched one royal goodbye to another, about the choice of cathedral over chapel and what it says about the right to choose a path to heaven. Some will remember a young woman in 1961 who insisted on York Minster because she wanted to marry where her heart belonged. Others will see a music teacher in Hull turning a classroom into a kingdom of rhythm for children who will never learn her titles. All those women were the same woman. Today, the nation learned to say her name one more time, slowly, fully, without the polite rush that public life imposes. If grief is the price of love, as another queen once said, Then this was a receipt copied in flawless calligraphy. The monarchy did not make this day about itself and, in doing so, explained itself better than any pageant could. A royal farewell conducted in the cadence of a chosen faith, a family visible enough to steady the country and restrained enough to let the service speak. In a season that too often confuses noise with significance, this was significance that did not need to raise its voice.